Yeah, should be going live now.
Over to you, Chair.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Thanks, Sam. Morning, everyone, and welcome to this first remote meeting in the licensing committee. Last met last March in the Civic Hall, so welcome and thank you all for attending, and welcome to anyone who happens to be viewing on YouTube or live, or a bit later on not live. My name is Councillor Ben Garner and I'll be chairing today's meeting. I'd like to start the meeting today by confirming that this meeting and licensing committee meets the requirements of the council's constitution, even though members of the committee are in remote attendance, as you can tell. And while items today will be fully discussed as usual, remote attendance requires a few slight changes to how I manage the debate. So usual stuff that hopefully all members and officers will be aware of, just muting microphones unless invited to speak, just so there's no background noise, which is really important for everyone listening. Keeping cameras on during the meeting where possible, and all participants will be invited to introduce themselves at the start of the meeting in a couple of minutes, just to make sure to any observers viewing online who's involved in proceedings. So ask for more patience than usual while we go through this process, especially in the first full committee. Another slight change to when we meet in the Civic Hall, in order to avoid any disruption to the meeting, should anything happen to my internet at home, because of course that's where I am, I propose we appoint a vice chair for the meeting who could step in during my absence, just to move the meeting along and get through the agenda. I'd move Councillor Hannah Biffle for that, and invite another member to second, please.
Happy to second.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll take a quick vote, and I'll assume, much like the Lord Mayor in full council, that silence is approval, if that's okay for members. Just to double check, are there any objections or abstentions to that? Excellent, thank you everyone. That's really useful. Hopefully it won't be needed. Internet's quite okay here usually. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you've done that. I'll go through the list of members first. Councillor Biffle.
Hi there, Councillor Biffle representing Kirkstall, thank you.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
Councillor Downs.
Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Eden Ward.
You can probably tell where this is going to go. Councillor Drinkwater.
All Drinkwater, Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Councillor Flynn.
Good morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adlam Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Garthwaite.
Al Garthwaite, Councillor for Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Councillor Knight.
Good morning, Councillor Knight, Wheatwood Ward.
And I believe Councillor Pat Latty is going to be a little late to the meeting. Councillor Lennox.
Morning everyone, Councillor Jess Lennox from Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall Katong.
Good morning, Abigail Marshall Katong representing Little London, Woodhouse and the City Centre.
Thank you. Councillor Richards.
Good morning, Councillor Linda Richards representing Ward.
Councillor Wenham.
Good morning, Councillor Angela Wenham representing the Wronghill Ward.
Thank you. And finally, for members and a chance for him to show off his background on the speaker view, Councillor Ray.
Councillor Paul Ray, Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Well, thank you. I'll do the same with the officers as well. And
if I may, Councillor Hutchison, Morley North.
Oh, there we go. I did miss you off. Sorry, that wasn't intentional. Thank you. Is there anyone else missed? Sorry. From members, that's fine. Officers, I'll just go around for John first of all.
There's two Johns, so I'm assuming it's me.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. John Mulcahy, Chief Officer, Elections and Regulatory Services.
I'm moving to entertainment licensing. Nicola.
Morning, Nicola Raper from Entertainment Licensing.
And Sue.
Sue Duckworth from Entertainment Licensing.
Moving to Andrew from Taxi.
Morning, Chair. Morning, everybody. Andrew White from Taxi and Private Hire Licensing.
And Andrew, I know we've got a couple of other, at least one of the taxi and private hire officers. Is Fallon still in the room? I noticed him earlier.
I've invited three managers, two of whom are quite new in post. I can't see Valens on the list yet, but we've got.
I am.
I'll stop talking. Right.
So it's Valens Jacobs, licensing and finance manager, taxi and private hire licensing.
Hi, Valens. And Andrew, you mentioned two of your new managers. Is that Phil and Richard? Is it? Phil and Richard, are you able to introduce yourselves to committee and welcome? You know, strange circumstances, I'm sure you'll agree. And you know, when we do get back into rooms, whether that's hybrid or properly again ever, then you know it'd be very nice to meet you both in person properly. But do you want to introduce yourselves, please?
I'm Phil Arnett. I'm the Quality and Standards Manager at Taxi and Private Hire Licensing.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Perrett. I'm the Operations Manager at Taxi and Private Hire Licensing.
Brilliant. Welcome and nice to meet you both on screen at the very least. And then we've got Mary.
Mary O'Shea, Legal Services, here to advise the committee.
Brilliant. And we've got Rob, I think, from Legal Services as well.
Good morning, Robert Brown from Legal Services.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we've got John Grieve, finally.
Morning, everyone. John Grieve, Governance Services, and I'll be clerking today's meeting.
Thank you. Is there anyone else I've missed off? That's fine. Thank you. So let's get to it. Moving to agenda item number 1, John.
Under agenda item 1, there were no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or public. Under item 3, I'm unaware of any late items of business. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests? Nobody's indicating a pecuniary interest. Agenda item 5, apologies for absence. I've no apologies for absence. I understand Councillor Pat Latty may be slightly late. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. And apologies for the meowing cat in the background just now. She chooses her time wisely. Going on to minutes of the last meeting. So as I say, that was last March. Good job we got written minutes to remind us of what actually happened there. So agenda item 6. Is everyone quite happy with the notes from the 3rd of March meeting? I'll assume correct unless anyone speaks up.
I think Councillor Flynn is wanting to say something.
Hi, Ben. Yeah, the sound isn't very good. I didn't quite catch what you said at the start of that little bit about the minutes.
Is everyone happy that they're a true reflection of the meeting, although it was last March, so memories might not be that great about the last meeting. And are there any matters arising from those minutes from last March? That's fine. I'll take it as no then. So on to the first item of business since last March for the full licensing committee. So can I invite Stu, item number 7, review of the Gambling Act 2005, a call for evidence, and you've got a report on the item.
Thank you, Chair. Members,
On the 8th of December, Nigel Huddleston, the Minister for Sport, Tourism and Heritage, announced an intention to review the Gambling Act 2005. This is something that we've been waiting for quite some time. He's issued a call for evidence with a closing date of the 31st of March, and it's quite a wide-ranging call for evidence, including protection of online gamblers, advertising, effectiveness of the Gambling Commission, redress arrangements for customers that feel that they've been unfairly treated, children's access to category D slot machines, and changes to the land-based sector and the outcomes of those. What we would normally do in this case is that we would draft a response, officers from across the council would draft a response, and we would pass it by licensing committee before submitting it. However, because there's such a long lead time on this, and in fact the closing date is until the 31st of March, we do have the opportunity for licensing committee to have more of an input into that response. And so we're asking if you would like to consider the best way to provide us steer and feedback regarding the call of evidence, which relates to the review of the Gambling Act. We've got a number of ways that we can do this. We could form a working group. We've done that in the past with our policy around sex establishments. I can take individual responses to the by email to the call for evidence, or we could do a draft, and then I could ask for feedback on that draft, or we could do a combination of those, and it is very much for members to decide how they would like to be involved. And that's all I have to say, but I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Brilliant, thanks, Sue. And just an initial question from me. You mentioned a 16-week consultation period. When's the date that ends?
31st of March.
1st of March. Great. Thank you. Any questions from anyone? I think Councillor Flynn, first of all.
Thanks, Ben. Andrew and I have had our hands up, I think, since the last item. I think you missed us on the matters arising from the minutes. Do you mind if I just go back to those for a moment?
No, that's fine. Sorry about that.
Okay, it was really just where are we in terms of the drivers who took out grants and loans, etc., to convert their vehicles for the clean air zone, which of course has now been delayed. What's the position on those at the moment? How are we looking after them?
Thank you. Andrew, and you have your hand up as well. Do you want to address Councillor Flynn's
yeah, my hand was up about something completely different. In terms of the drivers who have, they're not drivers, they're vehicle owners who have applied for grants and loans. The Clean Air Zone team are communicating with everybody who was either applied or partway through. We're working with the Clean Air Zone. I know Councillor Garner, we're expecting to be able to make a decision on the ability for the council to retain some of the clean air funding, which will enable us to give the owners of those exempt clean air zone exempt vehicles free vehicle licensing. So it's a clean air zone team issue. The clean air zone team is being sort of slowly wound down during 2021 and will close at the end of December 2021. But the main response for those owners who have already acquired for grants and loans is that they will be able to get free vehicle licensing for the period of the funding that the council's managed to secure for the clean air zone, which is about £1.6 million, which will probably last about 3 years. In terms of vehicle owners who have not yet applied and may do in the future, I don't know the exact position there, and certainly it would be something that the council may well be able to allocate budget and allocate funds to provide, but those funds would sit outside taxi licensing. I'm expecting a decision report from Neil Evans early next week, and then what we'll do is we'll share that as soon as we can so that we know exactly what the implications of that decision report are, Councillor Flynn.
Brilliant, thank you.
Is that okay on that, Chair?
Okay?
Yeah, sorry. Just in terms of my hand being up, I'll need to work out how to put my hand down. My hand down was a point on the minutes. It's nothing to do with what Sue's presenting on now. It's to do with I've included in the report a forward plan of consultation and get an engagement, which will pick up the area that we were trying to start in February and March last year. It's very, very difficult to have meaningful sort of public meetings on Zoom. We've really struggled this year. So I will pick up that point from the minutes last time, and I'll make sure I touch on that when we talk about the forward plan in my report. Sorry about that. I'll work out how to take my hand down. And sorry for interrupting.
I've just taken it down.
Oh, have I put it back up?
Yeah, no, that's fine. There's a problem on my end because lots of hands have gone up now. So I think there's a delay on my bit as well. Councillor Garthwaite, Al, I know you've got your hand up. Is that still on the matters arising? Sorry. Oh, you're just on mute, Al.
It's about the gambling. So
Okay.
I'll wait while matters arising gets dealt with.
That's fine. So now hands are back in my view. Are there any other matters arising? And apologies for missing that first one. That's fine. Thank you. Right. Sorry about that, Sue and Al. A question for Sue then from Al.
Yes, it's a question about the workings of the GamCare organisation, the Leeds Community Gambling Service that was set up in, I think, September 2019, and really how that's working, whether there's been a lot of pressure on the service, calls to it and so on, and have those increased during lockdown, or is that not known?
Well, I attend several problem gambling meetings. I haven't got specific data for you. They have been operating all through the lockdown, but I believe referrals have gone down. They haven't been able to do quite so much face-to-face stuff, obviously, because of coronavirus, and I think that is having an impact. I'm due to attend another problem gambling meeting shortly, and we will ask, as part of this process, for their input into the call for evidence. So we'll get some further data for you.
Thank you. Thank you, because I think it just helps with the background to making these decisions.
Thank you. Any other questions for Sue on the review, or any views on how we want as members to get a response? Are members happy to have that sort of informal and have a response sent by email, say, or a working group, considering we may have taxi and private hire working groups as well, especially after the next item is discussed. Councillor Knight, Christine.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have some input, actually, some comments I'd like to make about the review when it comes to be looked at. But if it's decided that this should be dealt with through a working group, will we have the opportunity to submit our thoughts, comments, ideas to that working group? Because I don't want to miss my opportunity to make some comment about the Gambling Act.
Yeah, that's fine, and by all means, you could be a member of the working group itself. It's usually three members, and other stakeholders as well, mirroring the sort of taxi and private hire sort of regular working groups we've had in the past. So by all means, if you can't be a member of the working group, then I'm sure all views from all members or anyone else involved will be and should be considered. So
thank you.
To say on that yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure that I make contact with you, Councillor Knight, anyway. But yes, depending on how members want to do it, I mean, we could, as officers, have it's an awful long call for evidence. There's 45 questions, so we could do a first draft of a response with the financial inclusion team and public health, and then pass that through all 15 members for comment. And then if you wanted to then get involved in a further meeting, then of course you'd be welcome to join us and join in that way, rather than do a formal working group. If you're already going to be dealing with taxi matters that way, it might be easier if we at least have a first run through the questions, and so that we can gather our formal evidence, and then you can have a look at that and make comment on that, and make sure that your views are reflected in our response. I don't know if that's a good way to go.
That sounds quite good.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks.
Thank you. Al, any is that on that point or anything else?
Yes, I'd be in favour of that approach, certainly. And I should have asked before, but on question 6, it says, what percentage of GGY do the top and bottom 10% of spenders account for? What is GGY?
It's gross gaming yield. It's a term that is used quite frequently in gambling, between the Gambling Commission and gambling operators, and it's basically the amount of money that goes through their books without any losses taken off, without any winnings taken off. It's gross gaming yield.
Sure, thank you. And then question 8, what are white label arrangements?
That I'm not sure about, and I'd have to look into that.
Yes, it's probably in there. Okay, thank you. Yes, I think it's a good idea to have, if you could do a draft response, and then we can look at that in more detail. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any other members, either any questions for Sue or any comments on the proposal from Sue for that way of responding, first of all, or draft response? Okay, so could I propose then that we take Sue's proposal, a bit of a mix, isn't it, of a draft response by Sue and the team, including financial inclusion team and public health, as you mentioned, Sue, which are really important for this. Out to members via email and see sort of who's interested and who will respond to that, and see what we need to do from that point forward. And we've got 2 months from this point, so it's not too bad. I should say quite a long lead time. How do members feel about that? I'll take silence as a yes, unless anyone has a hand up or wants to literally wave on screen if my hands are still delaying. That's fine. Thank you. So we look forward to that. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you wanted to mention, Sue?
I believe we've got another licensing committee in March. We'll aim to have a final response come back to all members by then, but we will have been in contact in between.
Brilliant. Thank you. Christine, your hand's just popped up there.
Yeah, just a thought actually. If we're going to do it that way, which seems fine actually, will we still get an opportunity to discuss between ourselves, or will it just be by email directly with Sue? Because I think sometimes doing it as a group, discussing things as a group is advantageous. So it'd be nice to have the opportunity to discuss it again as a group. Would that be possible?
That could be in the March meeting. Yeah, as Sue has just said, and we'll have a before it's finalised and finally sent after that point.
Great, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. If there's nothing else on that item, we'll move on, and thank you, Sue. And based on this and the next item coming, everything's coming at once for licensing committee. So we've had nearly a year away from full licensing, although we've had the subcommittees. Now everything's coming back. So thank you. On to the next item then, item 8. Andrew, this is the long-awaited Department of Transport statutory guidance, which has finally been finalised. I know we've been committee after committee for a couple of years now, waiting for this. Andrew.
Just about to unmute. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, long awaited, and in fact, just long. I think in terms of the guidance itself, my report and our self-assessment. So apologies to members for maybe not being able to deliver this in sections. So you've got quite a long report. Starts on page 19 of your pack. I'm going to talk you through the key highlights. I'm going to draw specific attention to the areas where either we have had historically a very different approach to that which the DFT are strongly recommending, or where we are currently, as of this point, not in compliance, but it's going to take rather more work than one more push or a minor sort of technical change. So there's quite a lot to cover in the report today. I hope everybody's had a chance at least to read the report and the summary. I appreciate the appendix is over 30 pages as well and may go into some detail. I'm really intending to send the Department for Transport any amendments, any comments from today, as well as the report and the appendix as well. So the purpose of the report is to show members the council's sort of self-assessment against the strong recommendation for the Department for Transport for licensing authorities. And in order to indicate that to members and also to the wider audience where the guidance has already been satisfied or largely satisfied, or we're at odds or not met, I've used a green, amber and red rating for each of the respective categories. And out of about 30 categories, we are red on 3. And I would expect probably a lot of our discussion and maybe changes in our future sort of engagement, consultation, working group approach to focus on those areas. I'm just going to hopefully summarize the background to why we've got statutory guidance from the Department of Transport. I think it's very, very welcome. And my view, particularly without having worked in taxi licensing the last time guidance was issued, is that this is much more prescriptive. It sets out a very, very clear framework that my view, and I would hope members' view as well, would set us it would set us on a good path for reviewing and updating and aligning our policies going forward. So the guidance document that I provided a link to says that this is a framework of policies that licensing authorities must have when exercising their function. So must have regard means we have to really check ourselves against the recommendations for the Department for Transport. And I think particularly to make sure we've got detailed discussion both today and afterwards in terms of what our approach would be, what else we can do, but also particularly in terms of how the different recommendations or different proposals or different changes could be brought in together. I've specifically brought the 3 managers that manage the 3 different functions within taxi licensing to the meeting today, partly because two are imposed. Valence Jacobs, you've met a number of times before, to make sure that they're aware of the seriousness that the council will place on a discussion about the recommended standards, and particularly where Leeds is either up to now has adopted a different approach, potentially for very good reasons, but those reasons need to be revisited, or particularly where we haven't quite managed to implement something and it's going to take more work to do that. So specifically, the statutory guidance, this is turning to the top of section 3, the start of the main issue. Statutory guidance, it's statutory guidance, not legislation. We've actually had a licensing committee many discussions where the council has lobbied central government on changes to legislation, and I think particularly in terms of the operator cross-border use of smartphone apps, this guidance does not address those areas that are a particular issue in West Yorkshire, and particularly in any of the major sort of regions where there's the ability to roam outside someone's licensed area in an authority, potentially with different licensing conditions. It's particularly comprehensive, prescriptive and detailed than the previous 2010 Guide to Good Practice, indicating the absolute centrality of public safety, and particularly the implications for strong licensing for the safety of vulnerable passengers. But I think in terms of Leeds' approach there, I would recommend that we welcome and embrace the conditions and match ourselves up against to what the conditions say. In terms of the areas of statutory guidance, there's a number of sections, and I'm going to summarize what's in Appendix 1. So the first section is administering the licensing regime, and I've called that Section 3 because it's Section 3 in the report, and then people will understand. Section 4, gathering and sharing information. Section 5, decision making, and I'm sure we will spend more time talking about that. Section 6, driver licensing. Section 7, vehicle licensing. Section 8, private hire vehicle operator licensing. Section 9, enforcing the licensing regime, and then the appendices at the back around the more detailed information. And I think one of the areas that I think Leeds would very much be advised to do is to align our policies along with those several sections, and that's what we're underway doing. I think a number of the recommendations in the guidance recommend a significant change, some of which Leeds is partway through but needs more work, and that's particularly where we talk about DBS checks. The guidance recommends DBS checks for employees of operators who are not license holders. It doesn't specify that the authorities should conduct those DBS checks. It just says you need to be confident the DBS checks are made, and that may be something that we can pick up in the review of operator conditions, but it would require consultation. I think, in summary, the two areas where the council has got a different approach other than the DBS for operator policies. One is to do with the decision-making framework, where the guidance is very clear that it recommends a separation between officers and members on decisions. I think the guidance suggests that officers do the investigating and members make the decisions. Leeds City Council is obviously a much larger authority than other authorities, and we are able to achieve a separation between officers and managers very, very broadly. And the third area is around the powers to suspend. So Leeds City Council has the powers of immediate suspension, and then with the view then that when the investigation's been completed, we can then make a longer term licensing decision. And again, the statutory guidance recommends that you should, in those cases, you should either suspend with a view to ending the suspension, or you should revoke. And so we've got a decision to make as to how we would either review our immediate suspensions policy and deal with that. So that's the summary of those areas where we're not compliant, and I'll turn to those further down in the report. Just going into more detail, section 3.9, which is on page 23. There's a lot more detail in there around the specific paragraphs in the guidance. So
Andrew,
recommends. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, Andrew. Could I just stop you there just before we go on to because it looks like you're going into the free, main area.
I am, yeah. So is it worth pausing and just see if there's any questions on that first before we go into them?
So anything general that isn't on the free, sort of what have been sort of color coded as red areas in the appendix before we discuss those in more detail. Are there any questions on the statutory guidance in general, or any of the other bits of the guidance for Andrew? First of all, I'm really keen that we go on to the three main areas in detail, but I don't want to skip over anything else. Councillor Flynn, it's a round of applause rather than a raised hand, but I'll take that as a compliment.
They've changed some of the reaction things. There's no chat box anymore, which is a bit of a disaster, really. Never mind. Really, I have a few questions, but I'll wait till the end, Ben, once we've finished it, because it covers several various sort of aspects of the appendix and the previous notes. Okay.
That's fine. Any other members with more general stuff before we go on to the three meaty bits where we deviate a little bit? Brilliant. That's it, Andrew. I think that's a cue for you to go on to the more meaty bits.
I'm just checking. I'm not muted. I'm muted. No, I'm not. Right. Okay, so going back to the report. So this is paragraph 3.9 onwards. So I've gone into a bit more detail in the report. Again, I didn't want to duplicate large elements of the statutory guidance. I think you could particularly turn to the areas where Leeds has historically had a different approach without necessarily reading every line of the statutory guidance. But I've attached the specifics in some detail in these three areas, starting with the regulatory structure, which is obviously incredibly important in terms of licensing decisions. The guidance recommends that authorities such as Leeds should have a sub-board basis to make licensing decisions. It doesn't say exactly what licensing decisions, and Leeds particularly makes thousands of licensing decisions every month. So I think that there is very definitely some need for us to if we're self-assessing against this, to in terms of our response to the Department for Transport, to highlight the range of decisions that are made. I think just going into in terms of the recommendations, Section 5.6 suggests that a regulatory committee or board or sub-board is convened at periodic intervals to determine licensing matters with individual cases being considered. And I think particularly this is very similar to that frequently adopted in other licensing matters, and particularly in Leeds to entertainment licensing and the sub-board basis that we've talked about. It does suggest that less contentious matters, i.e. we either renew or we issue about 1,000 driver and vehicle licenses a month. I think this is not recommending that we discuss every application. The openness that we provide when we summarize on a monthly basis our decisions, the document that we provide is sometimes over 100 pages long in terms of just summarizing the licenses that we've issued and renewed. Turning to Section 5.9 in the guidance, the recommendation is that unlike officers, elected members are not usually involved in the day-to-day operation of the service and therefore don't have relationships with license holders that may give the illusion of or impression of bias there, and it provides a separation between decision maker and license holder. Thirdly, some licensing authorities may decide to operate a system whereby all matters are delegated to a panel of officers. However, this approach is not recommended and caution should be exercised. Decisions must be and be seen to be made objectively, avoiding any bias. In addition, it may be more difficult to demonstrate compliance with the principles referred to above due to the close connection between the officers on the panel and those involved in the operational discharge of the licensing function. Okay, so that's the selection from three of the half dozen paragraphs in the guidance. In terms of what I've drafted in our response, so maybe for us to discuss now and to decide what we might do going forward, particularly if we get representation from local trade or even a discussion with other neighbouring authorities about reviewing our approaches in parallel. I think turning to each of those areas, the council has currently achieved a separation between investigation and decision making by tasking officers with distinct and separate roles. So officers, and these are usually enforcement officers, investigate complaints, they follow up the reported incidents, and they produce an officer report. The officer report is not a decision, but may have also previously included a suspension if the allegation is sufficiently serious. A manager then makes a decision about the license based on the information before them, working upwards using what we call the ladder from the smallest actions required to address the risk. And it may well be that Leeds is unusual in having those sufficient officers in different roles to allow this clear separation. Now, I think turning to the suggestion that you'd have different councillors involved in different decisions, I think this is where I'm afraid I'm going to bore you a little bit just with the scale of the number of decisions, and suggesting that if you were to convene a licensing sub-board, first of all, you probably have a lot of sub-boards, maybe potentially on a weekly basis, but also there you'd have the same members involved in lots of decisions. So if we look at around the suspensions and then the as a proportion of the suspensions, we're looking at around 400 driver, operator or vehicle suspensions a year. And particularly there. So if we were to look at how many subboards might be needed to do that, I think we would be looking at probably at least a subboard a week in terms of what we're doing. And I've taken Sue's figures in terms of the licensing subboards for entertainment licensing, around £2,100 per hearing, but it would involve a significant change in the role of a member of licensing committee. I think it would still involve a significant amount of operator time officer time to prepare for those subboard discussions. It may well be that we have a discussion after this, or you as members have a discussion after this and say, well, actually there are some areas around decision, for example, around operators or around ownership of operators and things like that, where actually we would feel very confident to be involved and make a decision. But so I just wanted to maybe pause the discussion there and just summarize to say we've achieved a separation from investigator and decision maker. We've managed to have enough investigators so that if there was a problem with or a complaint around that individual officer, we can ask for another officer to review that. We very regularly have officers' work reviewed by either their line manager or by a peer before it comes to a manager. So I think we've able to reassure ourselves that we're overcoming that side of things. Clearly, there will be more work for Leeds to do if we were to discuss this as a working group. But I think I've put some of the key areas of information in front of you. This is what sort of describes our current approach and would go back to the Department for Transport. And I've also shared this with the neighbouring authorities in West Yorkshire. And provided we agree today, I will also share, if I can, with the contacts I've got in the core cities who are very likely to have a similar scale and scope of operations, to see what their views are. If I stop there and just come back to the Skype discussion and just see if there's any questions on that one, which I think probably is the most serious, most profound of all of the recommendations for us.
Thanks, Andrew. And at this point, we have had representation from the trade. So by and we're knowing quite well Mr. Guram Nabi, who usually sits at the back of committee meetings, hopefully viewing today on YouTube as well. There's been a bit of difficulty with this representation because and members will remember that there's often individual cases discussed when the trade are putting forward the representations to the committee, which isn't ideal, and we're it's against legal advice as well, because we shouldn't be able to identify individual drivers in committee. So there's been a bit of difficulty with sharing the representation as it was given, but I will give the top part of it before it goes into individual cases. But basically and this is by I will tell you who has signed this, as I say, Mr. Nabi, the Secretary of Eurocabs and the Joint Trade Committee, Streamline, Leeds Private Hire Driver Organisation, and GMB for the taxi trade in West Yorkshire. So as trade representative, they'd like the following points to be considered around this part of the guidance. So having members of a regulatory or licensing committee, such as a subboard, and the trade would like us to go for a subboard model. This guidance, they say this guidance must be adopted. To give, in their opinion, a just and fair opportunity to licensing holders to at least present their evidence in front of elected members and get a quick resolution to any issues that arise. Several cases have been reported to trade representatives where drivers have believed they've been very harshly treated and would have liked to challenge the charges or allegations through the legal system and believe they would have been exonerated. I do have a question, Andrew, on that part. elected members may have experience of dealing with constituents who are taxi and private hire drivers through casework, will be aware of cases that have been ongoing for many months, according to this submission. And majority of drivers have dependents, mortgages, other financial commitments, etc. So we'll make sure that's shared in a way that doesn't identify individual cases, but I just wanted to bring that to members' attention as well, by some organisations in the taxi and private hire trade in Leeds. So I hope that's okay. And as I say, had it not identified individual drivers and cases and individual allegations that could have been shared before the meeting. As it happened, that came in itself on Sunday evening as well. So there were kind of time constraints in that as well. Councillor Downs, I think you had your hand up first. I'll go to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As you know, I've been a member of the licensing committee for a long time. And it's always struck me that we've got several roles, and one of them obviously is within the taxi and private hire side of things. When you look at the liquor licensing and that, we have subcommittees. When you look at sexual encounter venues, we have subcommittees. We as members get to go into it in quite a lot of detail and actually have decisions to make on individual cases. This has never been the case with taxi and private hire. And seeing this DfT statutory guidance makes me think it's something that perhaps we have been lacking on. I take on board what Andrew says about the volume of work that it would entail. On one context, we shouldn't be scared of volume of work if it's part of our duty. But the other thing I would say is that perhaps in the initial phase, two questions. One is, what do other sort of peer authorities do? Other core cities with this sort of level of taxi and private hire business, how do they deal with this? Are we out of step? And if we are out of step, could we perhaps look at moving towards this guidance, perhaps by setting up a panel or panels to review cases that are contentious, rather than sort of just going through all cases or things like that? Perhaps we're provided with an overview, but when it gets to some of these ones that, as the chair has alluded to, that have been flagged up by the trade as being of particular concern, perhaps that's something that members could and should sit on to give that sort of independent thing. I fully get the fact that Andrew said that he's got a big enough department that can cope with different officers, but I think that there's an issue there that the public would like their elected representatives to have some involvement within their cases, so it's taken away just purely from officers, and that's perhaps what we're elected to do and represent. And so that would be my thoughts and what I would like to see that we try. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Rick. Andrew, I'll just take a couple more if that's all right, just to suspect.
Yeah, I'm making note of the questions as well for the ones I can't answer today.
Well, thank you. Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chair. I have to slightly disagree with my colleague there, in the sense that as a council, councillors very rarely get involved in very specific individual enforcement matters, particularly where there's potential criminality or other issues that are highly contentious. And I am very dubious about extending the role of councillors, particularly when it starts impacting people's potential incomes, and the political pressures, to be blunt, that will put on elected members, which may inform their decisions in a way that actually officers will do in a very clinical way, which is how enforcement to a certain extent should be done. So I am very dubious about extending our role into decision making where, let's be fair, there is a history of elected members getting involved in decisions in other authorities that didn't go very well. And I think we need to be very, very careful. I do think there's probably some merit in maybe the contentious cases, but by their very nature, they're the ones that actually are probably more open to political pressure impacting members in a way which would be challenging. And I think we need to be very, very careful about getting involved in safety enforcement matters. Things, and I think there is a genuine point about the scale of the work. We are a significant authority with thousands and thousands of decisions being made. Where do you draw the line? In planning, we do the contentious ones. We delegate everything else to officers. In licensing, we delegate everything to officers by the contentious ones. So I think we do need to be very careful that if we are making a distinction about where we will potentially get involved, it is very clear. But actually, the very ones that are contentious are probably the ones that councillors as elected representatives shouldn't be anywhere near, because they're contentious by their very nature due to the accusations and the potential enforcement requirements that come around it.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because as Andrew was speaking, introducing this section, I just jotted down a couple of thoughts, and others have commented a little bit on them. And it just struck me that whatever we decide to do, particularly if we decide to change to this system, it should improve the decision. It should either improve the decision-making quality, or it should be quicker, as the representative has suggested it would be. I'm assuming that the subcommittees would be convened like the other subcommittees that we have, and that we'd have subcommittees A, B, C, and so on. Perhaps that could be confirmed. But it just seemed that we would, and Andrew said it would maybe come to a subcommittee or a sub-board every week. Is that just one sub-board a week, or would it be one of every sub-board every week? And I think, as Councillor Ray said about the total of these things, we need to be careful that we're not swamped by contentious decision-making requests. In other words, I think, as Councillor Downs said, if it's a question of just addressing the ones which are obviously contentious, that's one thing. We certainly don't want, in my opinion, to get involved in everything. I took on board the point about officer time being taken up by preparation of every single board. I would imagine that has to be a factor. And also, just referencing the fact that we are where we are, it's 2021, and we're in this situation with all the regulations that we're under. If we did decide to go ahead with this, which I imagine the decision would take quite some time, we definitely should not start it, in my view, remotely. It should only start when we can actually have them in person. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions myself, Andrew, and then unless there's anything else from members on that point, if you'd like to sort of go through them one by one and a bit of a summary. You mentioned about the separation between officers and managers, and we have, compared to other authorities, a lot of those. How many officers do we have who investigate these sorts of things, and how many managers? And you also mentioned about peer reviews and things where officers aren't sure or need a bit of reassurance about their decision. Do the managers involved with scrutinising the officers' decision making or officers' reports have direct line management responsibility for the officers they're reviewing? Because I think that's quite important that the line management is separated, as well as officers' management for these decisions. I think someone already mentioned about what Vic, wasn't it, about what other large authorities do. So that was going to be one of my questions as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think it might well be that my answers generate more questions as well. So I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. First of all, Councillor Downs, what do other councils do locally, regionally, core cities? I've made contact with my contacts. I've got contacts in Bristol and Greater Manchester. I've made contact already with them and asked them what they do. Haven't yet had an answer. In terms of the West Yorkshire authorities, none of the authorities have a decision-making framework where members make contentious licensing decisions. Bradford currently have, and Kirklees used to have, an arrangement where there could be an appeal to councillors instead of an appeal to magistrates' court. So that's a factor there. So we're not out of step with other local authorities, and we've spoken more as a region about this area of the guidance than almost all the others put together around that. And I do think there will be a theme coming back from the larger authorities saying, at any one point, we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of decisions that then need to go onto the framework. I just, while you were asking the question, I just ran a report to tell me how many taxi and private hire drivers are currently suspended, which might be the starting point for what's contentious, and the answer is 69. I've then gone into the reasons for that, and some of it is fairly straightforward, and there's a licensing issue to do with a Group 2 medical, and I'm afraid the remaining issues are to do with allegations of inappropriate behaviour, or they've been arrested one way or another. So particularly for me, that's our starting point. I think in terms of what might be contentious. In terms of Councillor Ray talking about sort of the overlap between investigation and enforcement, absolutely. I think the starting point for us to deal with the majority of the contentious sensitive cases is it's one of 10 enforcement officers would investigate either a complaint or a change in circumstances or a report of an arrest or a report of changes in the number of points a driver's got, or even maybe failure to declare something that then gets reported. So we've got those sort of different routes into enforcement, and there is definitely a starting point from that investigation that sits in enforcement, or it sits in the compliance function of the licensing team. In terms of your question, Councillor Garner, I'll come back to Councillor Buckley in a minute. Your question there, very, very usually the officers making the decision are the either line managers or they're one step away, so they manage the line managers of those officers. So they are they sit in the same function. They wouldn't necessarily line manage them day to day, but they line manage those people's supervisors, and those people's supervisors conduct those quality cross checks and say, if you're doing an investigation or you're writing an officer report, let's have a look at that before that goes to a manager. And that's really around establishing the facts. I would just to highlight, and maybe this comes on to Councillor Buckley's point in terms of could decisions be better and faster. When we talk about a licensing decision being made, very usually there's been a 3-step process. There's an allegation, there's an interview of the victim or witness, there's usually an interview with the alleged perpetrator, and usually before a very serious decision, such as suggesting to refuse or revoke a license, there's what we would call a reasons why step, which is we now have this information in front of us. We're giving serious thought to whether your license should be taken away from you or not renewed there. So we've got a number of stages of that process that fits very much in line with the sort of natural justice side of things that would absolutely need to be part of the decision-making training that we would provide. And I suspect what we might end up with in an individual meeting or a sub-board or subcommittee is we'd collapse some of that information where there might be a change in the facts or a claim that someone's been misunderstood. And what we can do in an investigation is to say, fine, let's go back and see if that changes. So I wonder if we might think we'd come to a quick decision on the day, and then we'd find there's some new information, and we say, "Oh, right, that changes things. What should we do?" So that's very much that overlap. Then, but if you like, the work goes back upstream to the enforcement officer. I think in terms of the decisions being sort of better, clearer, faster, I'm not sure necessarily that decisions would be in that respect any different. I think what I would say when Mr. Nabi and colleagues say that they feel cases are very unfair, I think what they might sometimes mean is we focused rather more on the seriousness of the allegation than we have on the mitigation from the license holder. And I think this is where the word harsh has been put in there. And again, it's a requirement that in making decisions, we give more weight on the risk that's posed than on the implications to the license holder of having their license taken away. That's the purpose of licensing. We're there to address risk first. Clearly, if we've got 300 or 400 decisions around suspensions and something like 30 cases where we've refused or revoked, we find other ways of dealing with the risk without refusing or revoking a license. And again, I wouldn't think that would necessarily be any different in a different decision-making form. I think it's possibly the expectation or the hope of the trade that members of a taxi licensing subboard would give undue weight to the mitigation, the financial impact on the license holder, and maybe not enough on the risk to the travelling public. And I think we would need to factor that into the framework for the subcommittees and subboards. I think I've answered the question. I'll come back from my notes from the questions and just see if there's any follow-up questions, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. There's I know Mary, you've had your hand up a while. Did you want to come in? And then I've got Valens' hand go up as well, and then Councillor Biffle.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something that the process which Andrew touched on. He said in relation to Bradford that they have a members appeal in place of going to the Magistrates' Court. It's not in place of going to the Magistrates' Court. The process is that the appeal to the Magistrates' Court lies from a decision of the Council. So the decision of the Council will be made in that situation by members. So whether or not you have another appeal process from officers, there would still be an appeal to the Magistrates' Court from that. Just to clarify that.
Thanks, Mary. Sorry, my mistake.
That's an additional step in the Bradford system. That's fine. Valens, did you have your hand up? I saw a round of applause rather than hands up.
Yes, just a few comments and to add on the point that Andrew have mentioned, responding to different questions that councillors have asked. Just going back to the statutory guidance, just to remind ourselves that this statutory guidance is written as a guidance to well over 200 licensing authority within the UK. And because of the different sizes of those authorities, it's normal to find that maybe some authorities may be doing something different and not necessarily as it is described or recommended in the guidance. Having said that, when to get to this point of the decision, just going back onto the point from Councillor Buckley, where he refers to the quality and how quick we're getting this decision. And I think the quality of the decision within Leeds is really something that person as an officer has been there making some of those decisions over 10 years now, and also have represented the council in court when those decisions have been challenged and represent the council successfully. One of the strengths that we have in here is the separations of the policies being entirely the responsibility of the members and obviously the council, and then for us officers having the powers or the authority to make the decision through a clear the scheme of delegation, which clearly states what decision and which officer can make such a decision. And as Andrew mentioned, as having that ladder where we can have a different decision to make, we can have a different approach, particularly, again, separating the people who are going to do the investigation and making a report to a senior officer or a principal officer to make that final decision. And if we don't even stop there, for the decision that, as you described, or some of members have described as contentious, we now go through a management case review, which is attended by our Chief Officer John Mokai, and there is four managers to go through such a cases, and with that group, we look into from different angles and then the decision for those contentious cases are taken from there. I think, as I said, that has been, in my view, the strength of our case. From point of view drivers or license holders, shall I say, they still have the right of appeal. They can still exercise the right if they feel aggrieved. They can go into the appeal, and I think a combination of those separation of responsibilities really, to me, is the ultimate strength of any decision that is made in Leeds. That's what I wanted to mention. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Valence. That's really useful for some of the on the ground work that you guys do as well. Councillor Biffle.
Thank you, Chair. I personally can't really see how having councillor subcommittees is actually going to improve the service that we're giving in any way. So I'm really comfortable with it remaining a delegated decision. What I would request, Chair, is that we potentially look at doing a review of the officer process in order to look at the speed of decisions and what holds up those decisions. And I do understand that things are complicated, but the points that are made by and have been made several times about the longevity of these suspensions is something that I do think warrants further investigation by us as a committee. Thank you.
Well, and with that, Hannah, would that be the whole, and other members as well, would want that in the whole committee or as part of the working group discussing the statutory guidance and especially these three areas, which includes decision making? Would we be happy with either, or would we want that as full committee as well?
If I can come back on that, I think potentially even a separate working group specifically focusing on reviewing that process. I don't want it to get watered down within this. If we're going to make that change, I want it to be a really decent change that works for our trade, for our officers and for ourselves moving forward. Thank you.
Noted, thank you. And people can agree or disagree by sticking their hands up in the usual fashion. Rick.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just coming back on a couple of points. The one thing I would say to Councillor Ray, and I understand the point he makes, but we do have to make some difficult decisions on pub licences, etc., which can be contentious and can have legal implications. That was handed to us from the magistrates' court, so it is somewhere where we do sit in a quasi-judicial situation. So there is a precedence for this. We do that. I take on board what other people have said, and I take on board what Valence has said about the way that Leeds operates. And I also take on board what Andrew said about the Bristol, Manchester and other local authorities. And that's what I was really seeking to see. Are we out of step? At the moment, we're not out of step. Whilst I personally would like to have some involvement in this, and I think that it is a role of a councillor to look at this, I accept that other members don't share those views, or enough other members don't. But what I would like to do, if I've understood Councillor Bithell correctly, is I would like to see us as councillors review the process and perhaps review some of the cases to see how those decisions were arrived at, to make sure that we are comfortable that the process, as I'm sure it is working correctly, and that the correct decisions are being made, and they're being made in an appropriate time scale. I think that if we as members are comfortable that officers are performing the delegated duties, as I genuinely believe they are, but we should have a look at that and overview it. And if that's the case, I'm happy with that.
Well, thank you. Any other members before we go back to Andrew, maybe to summarise on those points, then move on to the next bits, to the next other two major points of the statutory guidance and our own policy. No, that's fine. Andrew?
Okay, so very brief summary then, I think, of what we've got so far is either next month or in March, we're also going to provide an overview of 2020 in the annual licensing statement, and that provides us with a starting point of a framework to review decisions. Very, very happy to either summarize the process in terms of officers making an investigation, officers making a decision. You'll also gather in terms of the presence today of Phil Arnett and Richard Perrett as well. We've had a couple of retirements in the team as well, so we've got some people who are new in post but very experienced in the council in terms of making decisions, and it's a good opportunity for us to clarify exactly how the officer decision making process works in terms of those officers making investigations and those usually managers making decisions. The numbers aren't enormous in terms of decisions, but there's an awful lot more cases that sit behind that where we're weighing up information and evidence. And as Valence has said, we have a fortnightly meeting where we discuss probably 2 or 3 very contentious cases each month, which might be borderline, or the suggestion is we might depart from the council's policy for very, very specific reasons. So very happy to pick those actions up in terms of sort of minutes from today, and a suggestion for the future work program. If that's a specific area from a working group, we can pick that up as well. Okay, shall I move on to the next section? So it's back to the report. The next section starts 3.13. I've marked this as red in part because it's something that's not in place. I don't think it's an enormous change for us to do it, but in part I want to make sure that members today understand the scale of what we might need to do quite quickly to turn this from red to green. So this section, so 3.13, is about booking and dispatch staff, specifically in private hire operators. Be interesting to see if they were booking and dispatch staff working in taxi associations as well, which was one of the recommendations of the Task and Finish group from a couple of years ago. So licensing authorities should be satisfied that private hire vehicle operators can demonstrate that all staff that have contact with the public or oversee the dispatching of vehicles do not pose a risk to the public. Licensing authorities should, as a condition of granting an operator license, require a register of staff that will take bookings or dispatch vehicles as kept. So that changes the operator condition to say, right, give us the list of your staff, first of all, as part of your operator license. Secondly, operators should be required to evidence that they have had sight of a basic DBS check on all individuals. So this recommendation is that the operators do the DBS check, all individuals listed on their register of bookings and dispatch staff, and to ensure that basic DBS checks are conducted on any individuals added to the register. And this is compatible with their policy in employing ex-offenders. DBS certificates provided by the individual should be recently issued when viewed. Alternatively, the operator could use a responsible organisation, i.e. it could be the council, to request the check on their behalf. It's interesting that isn't recommending that operators sign up to the DBS service, the enhanced DBS service themselves. So the council doesn't currently have this requirement in place. We require operators, and when there's a change of operator, we require the person who wants to be the new operator, one, to pass an operator test, and secondly, to complete a DBS. So when vehicle proprietors, private hire operators, both Hackney Carriage and private hire drivers are required to have a DBS, operator staff taking phone calls and bookings are currently not required to do so. It's no doubt a development which would strengthen the council's approach. Operator staff do often have access to information about vulnerable people. To give you an anonymized example, we have taxi licensing have found out that an operator wanted to employ a previously revoked driver to work as a telephone operator, and we had said we have concerns over that person as a fit and proper person, and we do not want you to employ that person, and that person was then not employed. So it's very much this will be a further step there. I think looking forward, this provision would have to be included in the private hire operator policy review. So this was the private hire operators, cross-border, smartphone apps, and we would have to have that as a specific element of that, which would require a degree of engagement, would also require some sort of consultation as well. So it's a significant change from what we're doing. It's not a massive change in terms of logistics, but it may well be, it would need to be very, very clear how that would work. At the moment, the recommended length of license for a private hire operator is 5 years. So we'd need to be very, very clear there as a condition of granting an operator license. That might not then be reviewed for 5 years. The operator's DBS would be reviewed every 6 months in line with our DBS policy, but that would put a focus then on the operator to carry out their own DBSs. So no doubt a positive development would require a lot more work, I think, from operators, and takes them into finding out information about people who would be their employees, but a significant change. Okay, I'll stop there and just see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Andrew. Any questions from members? Please put your hand up. I'll just point out I'm quite supportive of this part of the statutory guidance. Working in GP surgeries, pharmacies myself. All the ancillary staff. They're not just the professionals working in those environments have DBS checks, because they more often than not are the front line to vulnerable people. They take their details, obviously in the case of booking staff, addresses of vulnerable people, addresses of places vulnerable people are going to and from. It seems a no-brainer to me, although, as you say, Andrew, a significant change for operators. And in terms of our work plan, we were going to look at operator conditions anyway. Of course, that's been a bit delayed. So it doesn't add, yet another working group. We were going to do that operator condition review anyway. Abigail, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Yeah, following on what the Chair has just said, I really welcome that development, Andrew, and I think it's very, very imperative that we actually put that into the checks and due diligence that we do with our operators. I know that you say basic checks here, but I think for the risk that people who have got convictions are exposed to the public and to children, we should also remember that a lot of parents depend on taxis to pick up children from school. So the whole idea about the DBS is protecting children, protecting vulnerable adults as well. We have a lot of disabled people who use taxis to move from A to B. So having a DBS check for me is imperative. It's not a basic check. They need to have an enhanced check, checks against vulnerable adults as well as children, which the basic check will not have. Now, in terms of allowing the operators to also carry out theirs, all we can do in the council already has DBS processing in place. So we could bring that in-house and pass on the cost of doing the checks to the drivers. So there are lots of ways of going about it. It's now online as well. Within 2 days, you can get a check on anybody online. Alternatively, from 2014, the DBS changed the rules on having checks every 1 year or every 6 months. So whoever is checked now, you register for an update service. It's a one-off £8 fee. And every single year or every single month, whoever an employer can always check the status of anyone. So at least when it comes to issuing licensing to anyone, you already have good information about that particular individual, which you cannot see on their foreheads or see on their driving license. So I will actually say that DBS check on every single operator should be mandatory, but obviously that is my suggestion. And like Councillor Garner said, they're frontline and they're dealing with people daily, and nobody's with them. So you just have driver and a vulnerable adult or a child in the car on their own. So I believe this should definitely be part of the checks that we do for our drivers and operators. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ray.
Yeah, I think just to echo some of those points, I think it is a step in the right direction, and particularly I think, if we can go for more enhanced checks where possible. I'm not quite sure I agree that the council should be doing it as, to be fair, as as the regulator, as it were, for this. And I think actually they should be doing it themselves. They have the facility to do that. I just think I would add an additional bureaucratic cost to the council that it doesn't necessarily need in these times. But I think the general principle of the more enhanced checks, I think, is absolutely vital as that extra safeguard for public safety.
Thank you. Any other members' comments? That's fine. Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the comments. I think if we were to incorporate this element into the current operator conditions review or the planned operator conditions review, the starting point would be the requirement on the operator to carry out the DBS. And I think particularly someone doing a DBS check, it doesn't prevent the operator from hiring the person with potentially a list of arrests, cautions, or convictions. It gives them the information, and it's their decision. So I think that's the starting point. Whether the council would mandate something over and above that, bearing in mind that these individual, if I call them call handlers, but it could be anybody who works for an operator. It could be someone who's a trainer for an operator. Think about the size of our largest private hire operators. They've got more than 1,000 drivers. So they don't hold a license. So we don't have something as a means by which to hold them to the account. So this is something that's about the council checking when the operators either we're doing a base visit or we're checking their policy to say, let's have a look at your list of staff and let's have a look to see your DBS book or something. I'm sure it might well be that what we can say is, have you got your DBS reference number, and let's see if we can check directly. So I'm sure there's a way for us to be able to do that. So I think that's why I've indicated this as red, which is it involves more work, and there's a dilemma or a question there about how far we go. Bearing in mind, I don't think the suggestion is that we would then be licensing call handlers, and then they'd have a license and they'd have to follow our DBS. We'd say that's up to them and their operator, and we'd offer our services and say, actually, you can get a DBS through Leeds City Council, but you may choose not to. So they're the sorts of things that I think we would pick up in the working group. Okay, shall I move on?
I may have seen Councillor Flynn's hand.
Oh, right.
And down there. Did you have a question or comment, Billy? Or?
It was really, I wasn't quite sure if he'd come to the end, and I was going to ask my 2 or 3 questions at that stage, but obviously not. If you could just bear in mind, I'll come in at the end.
That's fine. We look forward to that. Andrew, on to the third.
Okay, this is the third point. This is the third point where there's a different approach in the council to that recommended by Department of Transport. I plan to do a 4th section, which is just the implications for our policy review approach going forward as well. And that might be the appropriate time for a discussion with Councillor Flynn. But if I turn to this is section 3.16, page 24 of your papers for today. This is about the suspension and revocation of driver licenses. I'm not going to talk in great detail about this. I think I'm going to say that the Department for Transport guidance is that when a decision is made to either suspend or revoke a license once suspended should seldom be revoked. And then I've gone into some detail in the policy. Before any decision, 9.7, before any decision is made, the licensing authority must give full consideration to the available evidence, and if the driver should be given the opportunity to state his or her case. If a period of suspension is imposed, it cannot be extended or changed to revocation at a later date. And then further down, a decision to revoke a license does not, however, prevent the reissuing of a license should further information be received that alters the balance of probability that decision was previously made. So this is a suggestion that, for example, I've just told you that we've got 69 drivers currently suspended, maybe a third for not having a valid Group 2 medical, and maybe a half for allegations of inappropriate behaviour that would be in line with our immediate suspension policy. So the council currently has a procedure and a policy in place where officers, supervisors, managers can make decisions to suspend a licence on immediate public safety grounds, to allow us or the police to conduct an investigation. And I think in part it's where the police come in that leads to the perception of a delay, that the police would investigate while someone's suspended for a period of months, sometimes years, and only then after the police have ended would the council then conduct its approach. And our approach particularly covers both the new information. So this is the, you should only make a decision when you've got the information. And it covers 9.10, the minor issue could be addressed through additional changes. So for example, go and get a new eye test, get some new glasses and your group 2 medical's okay, suspension ended. That's not a time specific suspension. That's about bringing someone into compliance. For those more serious allegations, and I think if I've understood the recommendations in the statutory guidance, what the Department of Transport are suggesting is of those cases where there's a serious allegation against a driver of sexually inappropriate behaviour, the council should be deciding to revoke that person's licence because we think they pose a risk and we're not satisfied they're fit and proper, but we have not yet got the information. So in that case, we would have an immediate revocation, probably an appeal against that revocation on the basis that the council hasn't heard all the information, and possibly a risk that that revocation would be overturned. So at the moment, I think the council's sort of approach is to put that additional step in of saying we can suspend someone's licence. I guess the alternative to immediate revocation is to allow someone to carry on working, even though there is this question mark over their behaviour and their behaviour towards their passengers. So at the moment, we feel that we've got this extra step on this immediate suspension grounds that allows us to suspend, then complete the investigation, or allow an investigation to be completed if it's the police, rather than revoking immediately. I do think there might be some cases, and we've spoken some time today talking about the speed of decision making. It may well be that one of the things we can do as part of that officer review or the process review is to look at where we could quicken up the process of decision making. But at the moment, we've got a different approach. And again, like we talked about the decision making, we have got a different approach about immediate suspensions, asking about this, and it would take a policy review to either remove or fine tune or change significantly that policy. So I'll stop there and see if we've got any further questions. Let's come back to the camera. I've got a warning saying my
Oh, wonder what that warning was. Are you still there, Andrew?
internet connection's slow as well. So I hope
I'm
I'm
you're a bit on and off, Andrew. I just take questions.
saying things like, I hope you can still hear me.
Just a bit on and off, Andrew. That's all. A bit bitty. So Valence, I don't know if you or John available to jump in if we need to. But are there any questions from members on the suspension issue?
I'm available.
Thanks, Valence. I suppose it was Hannah and Rick especially commented on the review of the timeliness of decisions. This could be incorporated into that as well, I suspect. So that would be quite nice, and links quite nicely with the comments earlier on. Are there any other comments from members before we go to Billy and your three and your sort of lots of questions on all three parts? Paul, Ray.
Yeah, I suppose it's just to ask, what are the other comparable authorities' opinions on this in terms of how this will impact their decision? Do they have a similar model to us where they have the extra step of suspension before they make a formal decision in either way? And effectively, what risk will this pose to the fundamental function of licensing in terms of safeguarding security of residents, if actually the government's pushing us to a position where effectively they want us to revoke the license, with the real possibility that because there's a lack of detailed evidence yet, because the police are doing whatever they're doing or whatever, that we're then, by the sound of it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in a position where we may be effectively forced to reissue the license it does seem very counterintuitive in the way it's been explained, and I'm just hoping I've misheard that rather than that be the case.
I think we have lost Andrew, so Valens or John, if you're able to come on to that.
I will reply to that. As the officer, you have the authority to take those decisions involving either the suspension or the revocation and the refusing to renew a license. And I think in the Act, it asks us to make sure that we demonstrate that the decision we take is fair and it's proportionate. Now, the challenge from time to time we have is the information you get is either on the back of a complaint or information from the police, or in fact, sometimes it's the license holder who approach us and report an incident. And then next thing we really need to look into is on back of that information you have at that time, what is the decision you're going to make, which again, as I said, you needed to make sure that that is fair and proportionate, but above all, you need a total time to think about public safety. And this is why perhaps if I get the information from the police, I will see it, for example, as a reliable information. And therefore, at that time, it may be the correct approach to say, in this case, I'm going to suspend the license. And if on the following days, then we have a further investigation information, or in fact, if the investigation is completed by the police, then you can review that suspension and then make a further decision. Now, the other aspect that we needed to consider is, for example, if a license holder has completely done everything to avoid making us aware of any incident, and they ended up going into court and they are convicted. Cases like those which are fully determined, and after that conviction, where it's clearly the conviction is putting the license or the suitability to hold a license in conflict with the council's policies. Therefore, there can only be one decision, which will be to revoke that license if it was still had more time on it, or to refuse to renew if that conviction was found out at the time of applying for the renewal. In all of these, early on, it was mentioned about us being able to check on the DBSs and make sure that actually there is no further information. Pleased to say, all our drivers, all our license holders, they have current DBS, they are registered with the update service. So at any given time, you are able to check and see and consider the incident in line with the current policy, and make sure that a decision is taken. As I said, it has to be fair and it has to be proportionate. Sometime of those suspension, for example, if you go to our system today, you may find that the suspension numbers has increased. But there are the reasons. For example, we have a number of drivers who have contacted us and say, look, during the lockdown, there is no work. We are no longer interested in continuing to pay the insurance. So they downgraded the insurance, make it just a social and the domestic, in which case, if you remove the high-end reward, therefore you're not complying with the condition for the vehicle to be licensed as a taxi. So we suspended those vehicles. So, but on a day that such a proprietor would want to go back to work, they will just give us the insurance, therefore we will lift the suspension. all I want to say today, members, is we do put public safety at heart for any decision that we make, but we need to act on information we get. And sometimes it's a piecemeal information. Sometimes we have the solid information. For example, if you get someone, a solicitor writing to me and they said, the person they're representing is in jail. I don't have to ask so many questions. Clearly, anyone who's in jail will find it hard how they're going to prove that they're fit and proper to continue to hold the license. But in case of some of the allegations, some of the information, you may find that it's better to suspend on the back of the information, pending the review, pending further information, pending further interview with the applicant, so you can make a decision. There have been some criticism, will be frank, whether they've been saying, why are you suspending? You're taking the word of the customers, not being on the side of the drivers. But it's sometimes a very hard balance. And as I said, at all time, we needed to think of public safety.
Sorry, Chair, can I come in? Sorry, because that was the question I asked.
Yeah.
The question I asked, sorry, and I appreciate the explanation of our current process is,
yes,
with what's being said and the government basically saying, and again, I just want to be confirmed I've not misheard, that actually if we suspend, we can't go to a revocation. Is that going to force us into a position where we revoke more licenses with the threat that if that's then challenged because proper information hasn't been provided yet, because of all the things you've said, we will then be in a position of potentially having to relicense potentially dangerous drivers? Will it put us into that position?
No, I don't think we'll put in that position, simply because in Leeds we have the policy, which is clear around the immediate suspension, so which we can continue to use.
Let's interrupt again. The reason why this is being raised is because they're potentially asking us to change our policies because it's not compliant, and that's why it's down as a red area. So I'm asking, if we are compliant with what the government is asking us to do, will that put us into a position where people that we would have suspended while we wait for information and would have gone to revoking their license, we will now be forced to revoke their license because of the seriousness of the allegation, which they can then potentially challenge, and we may therefore have to relicense? Yes or no? Sorry to be direct, but I appreciate all the background information. I just want a direct answer.
And we've got Andrew, I can see your hand waving about as well. Welcome back. Is your internet?
No, I've moved to a completely different part of the house where we will now have different internet problems. I think in terms of the dilemma we've got, it does arguably suggest that we would, some of those cases that we would suspend, we would currently suspend and say we're going to investigate in some detail. If we were to say it's not a minor issue, so there's clearly a caveat in the policy that says if it's a minor issue capable of being remedied, like training, or I would put group 2 medicals in there. But if it's a serious allegation, which maybe we would get 25, 35, 45 times a year, there is definitely a risk then that we would be revoking on the basis of the report without necessarily having all the information. I think the guidance wants to square this. I'll go back to the section 9.7. Before any decision is made, the licensing authority must give full consideration to the available evidence, and the driver should be given the opportunity to state his or her case. So now for us, the available information often takes some time, as Alan has said, to provide. If we make it on the basis of the allegation it's a revocation, there is definitely the route then for someone to appeal because we don't have all of the information. And there is definitely then, I would say, an appeal then is, it's not a council process, it's an appeal to magistrates court. And that's taken on the basis of the guidance that magistrates are given. So there's definitely a chance then that some of those appeals would overturn the revocation. I've got no understanding around in terms of that, I would say in my time in taxi licensing, the last sort of 4.5 years, we have had 2 appeals overturned in those 4.5 years, and I probably know the names of the individuals, and very, very soon afterwards we overturned the appeal by going to the Crown Court. So yes, there is absolutely a risk there that a revocation can be appealed, and on the basis that you've been premature in making your decision, you shouldn't have revoked. There's a risk that would happen, and I think that's part of our concern and our representation in the appendix back to the Department for Transport, that we feel that a suspension enables us to carry out that investigation. Of course, it's better if that investigation is faster and doesn't take too long. But in the nature of these issues, sometimes they do take that long, and I think we would defend that suspension. I think also for the driver having an allegation, a revocation goes on that the national register of refusals and revocations, whereas the suspension doesn't. So a suspension that is then overturned because it's an unreliable witness or a mistaken identity or something as straightforward as that, that ends that position. Whereas actually that person is on the database of refused and revoked drivers.
Thanks, Andrew and Valence, and I think could that open up the possibility of a reluctance to revoke as well? If there's not that middle ground of a suspension, and thus potentially dangerous drivers, danger to the public still on the roads. Don't know if there's an answer to that, but it's just a thought. I think we'll go to the long-awaited bank of questions from Councillor Flint, if you're ready, Billy.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I've dropped out a couple of times like Andrew, so apologies if they've already been covered. Fairly quick answers would suit, please. First and foremost, this is statutory guidance, and I don't know whether Mary or Rob could actually comment on what that actually means, because it sounds like a contradiction in terms to me. How can it be guidance and yet statutory at the same time? In the main body of the report, paragraph 3.4 on page 22, it does say that the 2 of the recommendations or 2 of the issues discussed by the task and finish group, i.e. the start and finish business and the capping number of drivers, is not included in the guidance. And I'd like to know where we are basically from a Leeds point of view, because cross-bordering is probably the most irritating feature or frustrating feature for most, if not all, of our own this is Leeds registered private hire drivers, not to mention taxi drivers. Then moving on to the appendices, in paragraph 3.12 on page 32, it does talk about consultation, and I wonder if the trade has been consulted about the council's views on its own self-assessment as to whether or not the trade would agree with how we've self-assessed ourselves. Paragraph 3.8, 3.10 on page 32, the whistleblowing policy. I wonder if we could see it, please, not today, obviously, but in due course. And almost finally, the consistent approach from local authorities. I think there are a number of paragraphs involved, 313 and 420 on pages 32 and 37. Not strictly to do with this particular guidance, but I just wonder where we are in terms of those working parties we had on a consistent approach to the way in which we look at sort of private hire drivers across West Yorkshire anyway. And last but not least, Abigail's already mentioned it, the booking and dispatch staff safeguarding issue. All I'll say on that is the quicker we get it in place, the better, and that means very quickly indeed.
Thanks, Billy. Andrew, I'll jump in on that second to last point, Billy, on the and I know, Andrew, you'll have a bit more to add. The the West Yorkshire and York authorities and getting together. So I've been keen to get the chairs of the West Yorkshire and York licensing authorities together, and sent out an email just prior to the last lockdown, so end of October, and then of course it became quite apparent there was another lockdown. And although there seems to be broad agreement, apart from a couple of chairs who didn't respond, that yes, meeting and of course virtually now would be really useful. And I'm keen to get that going now. It's clear that we're in a bit of although we're in a third lockdown now, very stable, I suppose, for now, touch wood. And there seems to be a way out with the vaccinations going on as well. So chairs will be much more amenable to meet and work going on, much like we have as a full committee had a bit of a pause on what's going on, and now things are restarting again as things get a bit back to normal. So I'm very keen to meet the other chairs, and most of the other chairs are very keen to meet as well. Andrew, so.
Yeah, just in terms of the starting point about the status of the statutory guidance, Mary or Rob, do you want to just clarify first what this means, either for us to measure ourselves against it, or what if we don't apply it, or what if we apply it in different ways?
Well, I think statutory guidance, because it's not just labelled guidance. I mean, if you have guidance, and you would be, it is guidance as what to do. If it's labelled statutory guidance, I think if there was a court case, more weight would be attached to it than otherwise. So there would be an expectation that you would follow it, but we would have to have a look at even what's within the guidance and what it actually says. I don't know if that helps, but.
Okay. Yes. I mean, my understanding would be if we made a decision, or we changed a policy, and someone felt it didn't draw attention or sufficient attention to the statutory guidance, we could probably expect to be challenged on it. And similarly, I would expect any legal representation to make reference to this in I don't know, opposing the counselling decision or something. I put similarly, I would expect us, when we're being represented, to make reference to it as well. And someone say, "Why are you doing this?" And we say, "Well, actually, it's in statutory guidance, seen as national best practice." Okay, in turn, start and finish, and capping number of drivers. We certainly had tentatively suggested that start and finish could be an option on the use of smartphone apps in the operator policy review. The reality over all of that cross-border work, I think particularly, is if Leeds City Council does it on its own, we will not achieve, I think the main issue that you're saying, Councillor, is it's the start and finish and the number of drivers licensed in other authorities. So if we do it on our own, we won't achieve anything, I think, in terms of that. The law specifically says authorities cannot cap the number of private hire drivers. So UK law says you cannot cap the number of drivers for private hire. So we would need to be very clear. It's not in the statutory guidance, and I think it would be the sort of thing that if we were to introduce it or consult on it, someone would say, "Well, hang on a minute, it's not in the statutory guidance. Why are you doing this?" So we need to be very clear that that would be the position of the council, or the position particularly of the neighbouring authorities. And at the moment, we've still got other areas of work that we are looking at with the other authorities. In terms of the appendices, the consultation with the trade, no, we didn't consult with the trade. And I'd be very clear, consultation is not just with the trade. Consultation, we would do consultation with a whole series of stakeholders that are indicated in that on that page in the consultation. Consultation is not just with the trade, and we would have very, very often get different views from stakeholders compared to the trade. My suggestion would be we would share our findings with the Department for Transport, with people who are interested parties, but I don't necessarily think that the trade or stakeholders view necessarily would have a bearing on what the council self-assessment would be against specific aspects of licensing policy. So our proposal would be to share the report, share any revisions afterwards. Whistleblowing policy, I'll get a link to it. We'll include it in the feedback from today. John Grieve, I'll get the link and make sure that you've seen that. We have shared the link with our staff, so I'll make sure that we've maybe repeated that as well with our staff on the back of today as well. In terms of the working group, West Yorkshire and York, the focus for West Yorkshire and York at the moment is keeping safe licensing during COVID and lockdown. I don't know if Fallon's or Richard or Phil have said that their focus at the moment is working during lockdown on just providing safe licensing. So we have got we've only really met virtually in terms of the West Yorkshire and York authorities, and we've spent most of our time talking about COVID and passenger and passenger safety and driver communication. In terms of the booking and dispatch staff, we need to be very clear. I don't think we can implement a new policy without going through the necessary consultation. So I don't think that we can retrospectively change the policy just because it's in the statutory guidance. I think we need to be very clear that we've done that engagement and consultation with those groups to make sure that it's very, very clear exactly how that would work. And again, the starting point, I think, would be the operator conditions to say, as part of your operator policy, there will be a new section saying your booking and dispatch staff will be DBS checked by you. So that's the approach, and we would need to do the consultation on that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I've not answered.
Anything else, Councillor Flynn, from your bank?
Just coming back on thanks, Ben. Just coming back onto the cross-boarding issue, the start and finish and capping drivers. Well aware that this is it's the law, and we can't do anything better on our own. But I think there's an understatement to say there's a very strong feeling in the city, and I would imagine several other big cities as well, where they have people coming across from other areas and potentially acting unlawfully. And we just don't have the staff to actually check on it, as to whether we've made our views strongly known to the government about whether or not there should be a cap on the number of private hire drivers, and also whether there should be a start or a finish rule for private hire drivers.
Yeah, I mean, Department of Transport will get this report. It's on page 26, the policy review, section 3.20. So we've got the 5 areas currently of the policy review, including the operator conditions, smartphone apps, cross-border, would then include the call booking handling DBS. And certainly we would discuss, I can't imagine we're discussing any policy reviews without involving West Yorkshire and York. It might be that there's a slight different focus between some of the West Yorkshire and York authorities than others. And I think particularly if we focus on Leeds updating its policies or changing something without necessarily bringing the other authorities with us, I do not think it would have anything like the impact without us bringing the other authorities with us. And I think that's the challenge for us around those areas. We have got 5 quite significant areas of policy development, proposing to do one policy development at a time. And for me particularly, if we wanted to look at officer decisions in that probably would come above, maybe above the vehicle condition. So we could look at the suitability, CCTV, operator conditions, and then bring in officer decisions into that workload. That's a significant forward plan, and I think each of which would involve that sort of development and consultation. It's a significant piece of work.
Thanks, Andrew. Councillor Knight.
Thank you. So I've got 2 observations really. The first one is in relation to the suspension and revocation of the licence. And it seems to me, I was always under the impression that suspension is something that you do or you implement whilst you investigate something, isn't it? So, and this guidance seems to be making it an end in itself, so that it becomes the case that you end up revoking and you're having to, rather than suspending, because you can't revoke later. So they're forcing you to prejudge a case before you've investigated it, which is an antithesis really to the principles of our justice system anyway. So that would be my argument on that one. The other point, and there are lots of things that have been said that I agree with, so I'm not going to go over those, but just something else that's on a slightly different matter, but in relation to the guidance, whilst we're feeding back on this consultation, can we also point out to them their outdated use of language? Page 61, that you've quoted something from the guidance there on page 61, and it's referring to he, and I know they do this a lot in legislation still, they need to change that. It needs to be gender neutral. Could we feed that back, please, at the same time? Thank you.
I'll include that as well. I mean, I think it predominates in some of the language around that, and probably I've become immune to seeing it, but it does set off the absolutely the wrong implications.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the point around suspend or revoke, we have absolutely there is some case law that says if you suspend and then you assemble all the information, then you revoke, you're having more than one bite at the cherry. I think our argument is we don't know it's a cherry when we're suspending. We know it's a something. And I think particularly that's part of our response is to say, look, we've developed an approach. We think it's proportionate. I would expect that this gets drawn. I think this is where particularly the trade representation is saying it takes too long to bring a suspension case to bear to complete the investigation. If there is any way in which we can very, very clearly, as part of that process review or that officer review, explain exactly the circumstances where we could take one approach, exactly the circumstances when we could take another, I think members would feel reassured that they understood better that sort of a black box of how decisions get made. It may well be that we can refine that and explain that so that that's very, very clear. But we are absolutely, I think exactly as Valence said, we're absolutely making decisions focused on public safety, on the weight of the evidence that we've got in front of you. And I think particularly the fact that we do all of this investigation and at the end of the year, maybe 25 or 30 people have had their license revoked or refused at renewal, indicates that I think we do a very thorough job on a whole range of investigations. And then it's only in those most serious cases that we use that absolute decision. The thought of having to bring that decision forward when we don't have that information really concerns me, and I probably wouldn't want to say very much more than that. Really concerns me. There may be a way for us to do that soon. Obviously, as Valence said, if the guy reporting to us is in Armley prison, it might well be that our investigation is shorter than if there's lots and lots of different forms of evidence.
Yeah, I agree with that. It concerns me too, Andrew, the way that it seems like you're being forced to revoke rather than suspend. Otherwise suspension is not there just as a temporary measure whilst you investigate, if you've not then got the option to revoke later. So I think we probably share the same concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew and Chris. I think we're all agreed on that. I seem to be. And a really good point about the language being used and the gender in language. I think that shows actually this is, taxi and private hire law is decades old, and this is still decades old because this is statutory guidance. Going back to what Billy said, it hasn't changed the law. It's skirting around the issue with this statutory guidance. So I think that's a really important point, Christine, but it links to the issues that we've faced at this committee for years now, way before me, and as Rick said, he's been around on the committee much longer. Time and time again, the same stuff coming up, and it looks like it will be for a long time, although this is changing quite a bit. If we're happy to go on to the sort of final bit on the policy review, and Andrew, you mentioned it along the way anyway, I'm keen to add, if members are agreeable with that review of officer decisions, and actually that's that part of the response could be before we make a final decision on this, let's review what officers are doing, but with members reviewing what officers are reviewing and seeing if that's up to scratch, which I'm sure it is, for all the reasons mentioned before. But I'm very keen to add that as part of the response and as part of our work going forward.
Oh, it's all gone mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can get you.
All right, fine. Sorry, my PC's frozen again. Yeah, so just to summarize, section 3.12, very happy to feed in if it's, I mean, I can insert it in the work plan and we can see how we divide it up. Might be helpful to do it on the back of the annual licensing report where we go through the decisions we made in 2020. Sorry, that's Skype. Someone's trying to ring me. But yes, I'll insert in the bullet points in 3.20 review of officer decisions, overview of officer decisions, in part to clarify for the managers who are new in post, and in part to clarify for members, and just see if there's the opportunity for us to review, enhance, change those processes.
Bro, thank you. I don't know if you want to get a glass of water, Andrew, if you've got one in front of you. So, is there anything else, any other comments from members there, and especially on that group of policy review? So we do have the working group, which has been on hold for a little bit, of the suitability issue that is fully a year old. I think it was a year today that we're in the chamber with lots and lots of drivers and members of the trade, which was great in my view. Jittery and nerve-wracking, but great at the same time. CCTV, we've done the work of the committee. It's just the working group there. It's just we've got the consultation. We're put in about the review of officer decisions linked to this statutory guidance point, and then the operator and conditions, and down to vehicle and driver as well. Are there any comments on those from members, maybe on the ordering, the relevance, anything like that? Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just briefly on vehicle conditions, and Andrew will probably remember that just very recently, one of my colleagues had a complaint from an elderly person who said that the private hire car sent to collect her was too dirty to get into. And when you look at the appendix, page 58, under record keeping, it explicitly says there that licensing authorities should, as a minimum, require private hire vehicle operators to record, and it goes on to say the name of the passenger, the driver, the driver's license number, and the vehicle registration number. However, the company involved in this complaint, the information he received was that they couldn't trace the car and they weren't able to trace the driver, or they were having difficulty. And that seems to be a contradiction, doesn't it?
Sorry, I'm just double checking the exactly what the appendix says. The fact that they've got records at the time might, I mean, I can remember the complaint council. We weren't sure if something happened late one day or early the next day. I can't remember now. So there was some question about exactly the time or date. The whole purpose of having that record keeping is so we can trace exactly that complaint. I can remember you saying it's a constituent in her 90s who's going for a blood transfusion or checkup. Did not want to bother her. I absolutely did not want to worry her anymore in terms of that. And it's absolutely the case that we want the good record keeping. It's the same reason we want the livery and the stickers on the vehicles, so that someone knows what operator that vehicle was working for. So the fact that sometimes, and it might be, I'll ask a bit more and find out exactly what sort of response, whether we think we've been fobbed off on this complaint. That's the whole reason why we want the booking records, so that we can trace the passenger. So absolutely, and then talk to the driver. The reality there is that we can have the very strongest policy conditions, but if you can't then trace the driver and say exactly which vehicle it was or which driver it was, the policies don't really have a hard edge in terms of applicability in the real world. They sit being council policies rather than having real effect. I'll now you've mentioned that, I'll follow up again and just see exactly what we did get back from that, because you told me the operator, we knew it was within a sort of 16-hour or 20-hour period, we should be able to do better in terms of getting a better response.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members, comments, questions? No hands going up or frantic waving at screens. So thank you, everyone. So in terms of the recommendations on that, the purpose, content and information, yes, we've considered the proposed response and we've made those further recommendations. So especially on that review of officer decisions by members and linked to the annual licensing report in the March committee, which will be fantastic. Any other points there? Are we all happy with that? I will take silence or lack of frantic waving as positive. Brilliant, thank you. That's really important. We've been waiting for that for years, literally years. So it's really good that we've been able to consider that. And really good work by Andrew and the team actually in a big response there. It's a very meaty response. And so hopefully DFT will take that on board. So on to agenda item 9, date of time. Date of time of next meeting is to be determined at a later date. Although we do have maybe a couple of items for February, at least one item. So we just need a date of a February meeting, John. I don't know if, without looking back at last year's diary, what we usually have for a February meeting.
Chair, we don't usually have a meeting in February. We're having a meeting today, 26th of Jan. So we're talking early March when the next meeting should be.
That's fine. So we'll get a date firmed up and sent out to members ASAP. Thank you. Otherwise, that concludes the business of the meeting, which is great. So thank you, everyone. It's been really good to be back as a whole committee again. 10 months is a long time. So really great there. See you all soon. Hopefully subcommittees, we'll all see each other. Maybe not as intense as back in August once this third lockdown is over, but I'm sure we'll all see each other's faces quite soon anyway. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to everyone who's been watching.